And so 103 it's an interesting district. It's Northwest Miami-Dade and South Broward, so Miramar. Oh, and by the way, this is my fan club. So my husband Chris and my little one Steve.
We'll go fan club.
And so one of the reasons actually that they're here is, as a mother of a 2.5-year-old, my time has been very much split in 400 ways, especially the last few months. I filed in March. It wasn't part of a long career path. It wasn't part of a summer plan. There's several factors that got me to file, and I'll go into those, but it was really the big one was that after the Parkland shooting, I searched to see who was running in 103, and mostly because I wanted to support them, and I wanted to be behind one of the many causes that pull at my heartstrings. And at the time, the Republican opponent was running unopposed. And the nights that followed that, when I saw that in the Division of Elections, felt a lot like the second week in November of 2016, where I felt disillusioned, I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. But the worst feeling was the feeling of guilt that I felt I had not done enough in that presidential election. I felt that I had been sort of a Facebook politician, right? So I spread my gospel through my social media, and I showed up in election, and I did my part, but it wasn't enough. And I now know that it's still not enough for me just to do that. And so the way that I got here is, my family is Colombian. I'm the firstborn in the United States. My parents came from Colombia about 40 years ago. And many of the issues that our platform, that politicians are talking about, the reason I enjoy talking about them is because they're personal to me. They're not just some talking point. Like I said, I'm not running for office because I had nothing to do over the summer or because it was a career move. I am running for office because I felt there was a necessity. And living in the part of Northwest State, I've lived in between Hialeah and Miami Lakes my entire life. I have always felt underrepresented. One, sucked being Colombian in the 80s here in Miami-Dade County. So I experienced a lot in a very indirect way the discrimination that my parents felt. Many people from outside think that once you're Hispanic, you're just Hispanic, and I'm sure everyone here at this table knows that those aren't the rules in Miami-Dade County. And so with elected officials specifically, I sort of always felt on the outskirts. I went to public school, elementary, middle school, and high school, all in my area, and have now made the choice of raising my son in that same area. I'm very proud to be from Hialeah. I have a bachelor's and a master's from Florida International University. I've worked for government. I've worked for a professional basketball team. I speak fluently both languages. In other words, there is no reason for me to hold my head down or to be ashamed when people called me that little girl from Hialeah in many of the government jobs that I held. And I feel that I owe it to my community to stand up for them. Unions, one of the reasons unions are a personal thing to me is my father was a union man. My father had the amazing blessing of working for Entenmann's, the bakery, for 25 years. And he retired from the bakery and has had a pension. Our family had health insurance because of this. And one of the reasons that I mentioned being Colombian in the 80s was that my father, as I became an adult and we would talk about unions, all of a sudden we'd have this very adult-like conversation. He said that for many decades, he felt the union was the only organization that ever had his back. That he felt that it was the one group where, at least within Entenmann's, if there was a decision that was made that didn't take them into consideration, if overtime decisions or safety laws were not being followed, he always saw the number that was on the wall and knew that whoever answered that number always had his back and stood up for him. And that's my family story, that we at every turn have had somebody that has stood up for us. And so as the years have gone on, I, like many people, I think got comfortable. You know, we had 8 years of a president that I did live in a bubble and thought we were moving in the right direction. And so I didn't feel that 2016 necessarily needed 150% of my effort. I thought maybe 100 or a 90 would get me there, and it obviously didn't. And so the way that I felt right after the presidential election, I don't wish that on anyone, of knowing that you didn't do everything in your power. And so I, with some friends in the area, started a club soon after the election, the Northwest State Democratic Club. And there were two main reasons we did it. One was to foster a candidate so that come 2018, in 103 specifically, we would have a candidate that we could now have this ground force where we could have volunteers. Most of us in that area come from the same financial background, so we knew there wasn't going to be some angel donor, as I guess now that's what they call them, that just kind of hand over a check. So we knew that we needed boots on the floor, right? And we needed to have like people that knew the area, knew what neighborhoods to walk, knew what doors to knock on, and knew the issues affecting our area. And so we started that soon after, and a year went by, and that was the idea, is that we continue this little swell, and if a candidate comes around, we'll do the best that we can. And then about a year ago, Yvette Gonzalez-Pekovic, she ran in 103 in 2016. I grew up with Yvette. Yvette got in my ear and said, I'm not running again. She's a mother of two, took a toll on her family, got in my ear and said, you really should run. I said, absolutely not. I will work with the club, and I will continue to do everything that I can for the club, and as soon as a candidate shows up, I'm all in. But I can't do it, my son's only one. And so she stayed in my ear. And for the most part, she had lost the war. Like, it was not gonna happen. And then the Parkland shooting happened. And I found myself not just heartbroken over the tragedy, but I found myself with that same feeling that I had felt on the 10th of November, that I had not done enough, and that I needed to now do more, because one day my son's going to ask, what did you do? And my husband will tell you, he doesn't think CJ will ever ask him, right? Because he has his personality and he's just very even keel. But my kid's gonna know who I am, and he's gonna know that I'm outspoken about issues, and he's gonna ask me, so Mom, what did you do when 17 people were killed 30 minutes from here? And I can't say what I would have said in 2016, which was, it's not enough. So that's when I looked up to see who was running. That kept me up at night, and I made a few phone calls. But then I found myself within a 48-hour window in Tallahassee on the Rally to Tally, which was a 9-hour brutal bus trip to go and speak in front, and my friend was there, to go and speak in front of the Senate. I was a communications director, so see, this comes really easy to me. Not because I studied it, but just because naturally I don't shut up, and it's just something I'm very comfortable with. But when I went up there, it wasn't to speak in front of the Senate. I knew that high school students, especially from our area, were going to be there. And I felt that students needed to have adults now stand behind them and say, all right, say what you got to say, we got your back. So we got up there, and as I mentioned, I used to work for the government. I worked for the Expressway Authority. And so as a communications director, I got the good end and the bad end, which was the outside world thought that you were a blind spokesperson for an agency, and there were plenty of things that the agency did that I wasn't in favor of. But I had the privilege of serving sort of as a spokesperson for the community as well, to come with the concerns of the community and try to speak to the board, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So I understand the importance of at least showing up and making your voice heard. So on this bus trip, many of the students, once they would ask me, oh, what'd you do for a living before having, a son? I'd say, oh, I was in communications. They'd all pull out their cell phones and say, can you look at our speech and tell me if it's okay? And so they would. They had a perfect little laid out speech, their beginning, the middle, the end. And then after a downpour and a beautiful protest, we were all fired up and we went into the Capitol, and we were going to sit in on a Senate hearing. I'm very familiar with the rules of order. And so we were given a speech right before the hearing started about all the things we weren't allowed to do. We weren't allowed to cheer, we weren't allowed to clap, you weren't allowed to call anybody by name, you weren't allowed to attack anybody. Anybody would be escorted out the moment that they would. And of course you have a panel of senators saying this, to students, so everyone was in line. They merged the bill seconds before the hearing. And the reason that mattered is we had gone up to not speak about one bill. One bill was about banning bump stocks. It was very vanilla, nobody was against it, well, in our group. And then there was the bill of arming teachers. And so these were two very separate ideas. So when they merged the bill on a technicality, if you ever go to Tallahassee and speak, there's these speaker cards. And on the very top right-hand corner, it tells you to list the bill number. So the bill was 7024 that we were going to speak on, but when they merge it, 7024 no longer exists. So on a technicality, they're not calling the students up. And as a few minutes are going into this hearing, a young woman, or I'm sorry, a representative stands up. She wasn't called up or anything, but kind of goes up to the podium, opens her notebook, says that she's there to speak against the bill. The senator, realizing that there's 800 sets of eyes on her, says, "Can you please identify yourself?" Remember, those were part of the rules that she had given us at the beginning. She says, looks up, looks her straight in the face and says, "You know who I am. I'm here just to tell you that this is against the Second Amendment." She closes her notebook, sits back down. No one really stirs. Then a few minutes later, Senator Rodriguez from down here in Miami brings up another point. The representative gets up again, opens her notebook, is asked, "Where's your speaker card?" She kind of waves her off and says she has it. So she has not followed the rules that we had been told, right? You have to identify yourself. And so when that happens, I think the students pick up on the fact, who is this lady? Why is she going up there? Why is she being called up? And some melee happens. As they're all going back and forth, I go in and grab a speaker card. And I run over to Senator Rodriguez and I start screaming like a mad woman, asking him, "So what's the number? What number do I need to write on here?" And he yells it at me. I mean, it was really out of like a movie scene. He screams it in the chamber. I write it down, run over to the sergeant of arms. He has no choice but to call me up now. I did not go up there with the intent to speak in front of senators. I felt that it was the job of teachers and students to speak, and my role was to support them. But I did have an opportunity for 2 minutes to speak to the senators. And what I said to them was exactly what I said to you. I don't want to face my son and say that I didn't do everything in my power. And I looked at each one of them in the face and I said, "And so what are you going to tell your kids? What are you going to tell these kids behind us? What are you going to tell my kid?" Because have you ever noticed that teachers, when they refer to their students, they always say "my kids"? So when are these kids going to be our kids? When are we going to speak up on children, not just because they're the one that I put to bed? And so I had followed the rules, introduced myself at the beginning, and I kind of went to a speech. When I finish, I end with, "And once again, my name is Cindy Polo, and I live in Miami-Dade County." And the reason I repeat that is because you've allowed the representative from the NRA, Marion Hammer, to come up here twice without having to identify herself. That moment changed what has now been these last few months. I went up there with the intent to help others. And when, on the way back, and so the hearing went on for a few hours, and everyone spoke. And on the way home, a few of the students who had, some of them were very outgoing, some were wallflowers. They had no intent to speak at that event, or at the hearing. Came up to me and said, "When you got up there and called out that lady, I realized that we all have a voice and I have to use it." And they had gone up and spoken. So by the time I got home, my phone was blowing up. "Have you ever thought of running for office?" was the question. And the first person I had to ask was him. "You know what this means for our family. You know what this means for your time. You know what this means for our son." And his response was, he's going to ask me what I did when 17 people were killed. And I can't say that I held his mom back from doing what she was meant to do. And when I asked my parents how they felt about it, because they have been our daycare, my dad said, "I've been waiting for this moment since you were 6 years old," and went to a protest about immigration rights. So I think everybody thought that I would get here, maybe before I did. But each one of these topics that are being addressed and used as talking points are personal to me. I know what an immigration struggle is. My favorite argument is, well, why don't they just go through the system? Well, I can name the 2 lawyers that stole my parents' money on several occasions. I can go through remembering what my brother went through, having to lie on a college application because he wasn't sure what that meant. That brother is now a U.S. citizen. He's a space engineer for Boeing. And he's a product of my community. And so all of these stories are our stories. And I have felt that, especially in our area, people care about us. When election season comes around, sometimes they don't even care about us. They just go to the nursing homes in Hialeah, and that seems to get them elections. And so this time around, win, lose, or draw, because honestly, I don't That is not my main focus. My main focus is that I feel that everyone that runs for office, whether on our side, their side, no side, has to answer to people and has to explain what they're doing, has to explain what they haven't done. And if we don't hold them accountable for those actions, then we are just as guilty. And so having someone unopposed in my area is just not okay for me. And so now they have to explain themselves, and they will have to spend money on fighting for votes in my area. I unfortunately don't have much money. I don't come from money. My network is vast, but not rich. It's the working people of my area. It's my best friends are teachers on teacher salaries, and I've said we can't write you a check, but we can give you our Saturday, and we can go knock on doors, and we can stuff envelopes for you. And I don't think that has anything to do with me. I think it's that we are tired of the same names, of the same faces, of the same policies, and it's time that we demand change, and even if it's chipping away. What Yvette did 2 years ago, she did it when it was harder. There was no women's movement, there was no blue wave. It wasn't cool to be a mom running for office like it is right now. So she did it when it was much more difficult. And I think she started chipping away at something. And if I can at least do that for someone, whether it's 2020 or later on, but encouraging somebody in my community, a daughter of Nicaraguan parents or a daughter of, Honduran families that are products of our community, that decide that their voice does matter enough to run for office, then I have done my job as a candidate. And so I appreciate your time. I know that time is much more valuable than anything else. And I really want to hear from you guys as to, what other reasons have brought you to this table and have brought you to creating organizations. Because I know that being tired isn't enough. It's being tired, resting, regrouping, and then fighting. And that's what we're all doing, is just trying to fight what's established now.
Thank you for your presentation. Wonderful, yes.
Did you